Hello, Merrick. How are you, man?
Hey, Ashok. Good morning. I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. And, since everyone was talking about your sweater before we went live, I just want to give you an opportunity to introduce your sweater.
Indeed. Well, what could be better? And likewise, I'll ask about your sweatshirt. But it's my Chilean sweater. Working with the Chilean salmon industry way back in the day, and you have to bring back the goods from these trips, which are now over, of course, since I haven't traveled in some time like the rest of us. But I'm so glad to travel virtually and be here with you.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. This is an experiment, like most things that MetaCulture does. We are constantly trying to find ways to engage with each other in deliberate and thoughtful ways. And I know that this is something that a lot of people talk about, but let me let me give you a sense of what I mean by experiment. We try to craft conversations and try to focus on the kind of issues that are most pressing, even if in the mainstream or in the zeitgeist, these might come across as provocative or problematic. And this means that very often the kind of approaches that metaculture takes are, let's just say, people struggle to find, um, people struggle and are not always comfortable with it. And that isn't what we are aiming for, but that's a price we are willing to pay if we really want to try to find a different way of addressing the vital issues of the day. Again, metaculture has been around since 2005, and over the past 16 years, we have morphed from a classic conflict resolution center focused on dialogue and mediation and consensus building to an organization that's focused on trying to figure out how to create humane societies through understanding the world in a more precise and accurate way. So, welcome to Metaculture Studio, which is a series of conversations in which we will slow down and not have the kind of conversations which you will normally find in podcasts or on television, where the approach is to either address very provocative issues in the spirit of a debate or an argument. This is not going to be a gotcha conversation. Also, we are
Ashok, I'm
not.
going to try and get you in this conversation. I just want you to know.
I'm going to count on that because I think the interesting balance is between being completely honest, even if that provokes, but to do so in a way that we leave the space open for genuine disagreement and exploration. It's a cliche, but I want to call this a learning conversation
Hmm.
because I hope that I will emerge from this with a better understanding of Merrick, better understanding of the topics that I think I know about, and that you folks, by being part of this, will get some insights and ideas that you may not have considered in the past. On that note, welcome again, Merrick.
Thank you
Merrick
so much.
Merrick Hoben is someone I first met in 2005, 2006, when he came to Delhi. And I was in India. I had just started MetaCulture and with the World Bank, with a very exciting project that he put my way. And I remember declining it because at that point in time, we didn't have the Hindi language competencies
Hmm.
that would have allowed us to go to Himachal Pradesh
That's
and
right.
genuinely talk with the villagers. And I got slammed by my own team saying, you never say no to a project.
That's not the consultant way, man. You made
That's
a
not the
big
consultant.
mistake.
Well, my life as a consultant has been littered with such mistakes.
Yes.
And so that's just what it is. But Merrick is, for those of you who don't know him, he is one of the few people that I know who has spent almost the entirety of his 2 decade career as a mediator and facilitator dealing with some of the most difficult and complex and even dangerous conflicts. So I won't say anymore. He works with an organization that I have enormous respect for, Consensus Building Institute out in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Welcome, Merrick.
Thank you so much, Ashok. Let me just say, I'm here not just to learn, but to pry diplomatically into your own life and experience. You are one curious fellow, let me say. We are both colleagues of professional experience, but also friends. And it matters to me that I have opportunities like this to actually know you better, but also to jointly discover in some very critical lines of query. And that's where I'd love for our conversation to go today.
Thank you. So let me start with a very basic question, just to kick the conversation off, Merrick. You've been doing this work for a couple of decades. At this point in your career, as a mediator and facilitator, what is your biggest concern about the work you do?
Biggest concern. Let me just say, first of all, to anybody listening, that none of these queries are prepped. So I'm taking them right off the top, as Ashok will. And my aim in this is to either make Ashok laugh or cry today. So those are my two metrics I want everybody to know, right? And perhaps I'll be the first to laugh or cry. We will see. My biggest concern. Let me just suggest briefly a little bit about how I see myself, and then answer that question, who I am. So there's the professional in me. There's the identity you've shared as a facilitator and mediator. What does that mean? That means that I help people have more constructive exchanges and dialogue in theory, special emphasis on theory, that produces better and more meaningful outcomes for individuals and organizations. And so I've been doing that for a long time. It's not easy work. I suppose if you ascribe to the theory of mastery, you're supposed to take you 10 years to get good at anything, so to speak, or 10,000 hours, they say. In my case, I'd say it's probably like 50,000 hours to feel like I have some meaningful level of competence. But my concern, right? You say, what is my concern about this space that I operate in? I'd say it's a concern and an observation. And I'll be brisk and then turn it back to you on this same thread, which is that we, in the work that I do, have often used, as facilitators and mediators, some very important theory about first understanding people's critical interests and priorities and concerns, the obstacles they face, the options that they may have in front of them to make better decisions on issues that matter, a social or an environmental conflict. And by putting these puzzle pieces out there and helping to connect those as facilitators and mediators, that we can actually come to places of what we call value creation, or solutions that are better for everyone compared to their next best alternative. That's a really important phrase here. Not because I always ascribe to it, just to be clear, but because it's a mindset, right? And I would suggest to you the concern that I have is that while that structure and way of thinking about dispute resolution has been incredibly helpful, it turns out that the places that it works are a lot smaller than we thought. The problems of our day, their systemic nature, the roil of emotion and values that are at sort of peak volume socially and politically right now, have, in my personal experience, and perhaps not in everyone's, made those spaces smaller. And so what's been calling my attention are different things that matter in actually people rising to a level of humanity and connection and creative problem solving that took me, as I said, way too long to figure out, but I'm happy to talk about them later. But it's really a realization for me that if we stick with the same mindsets and the same approach, we are not going to see much of a difference in some of the most critical discussions of our day. That would be my reaction, just right off the start. Let me just ask you for a moment. What's concerning you, sir? What is concerning you in this space? And I also have a whole other thread of things I want to throw your way, but I'm just curious, what is on your mind? What is calling your attention today?
You know, I have developed a reputation as a Cassandra because, particularly from 2013, I have been almost single-minded in trying to alert people to the reality that the world of the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and 90s is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And our field, like many other fields, even the entire arena of human rights,
Mm-hmm.
the entire idea of a liberal democracy, of secular and pluralistic societies, they were based on the assumption that these societies would be safe from despotic or authoritarian tendencies, which have always been latent in human societies.
Mm-hmm.
So when I look at our field, and I love the work I used to do, and I hope that one day I can go back to it.
Mm-hmm.
The world that allowed that work to grow
Mm-hmm.
was one which was, and I'm going to be a little provocative here, the one that was protected by the 800-pound gorilla, which was US hegemony.
Mm.
Let's be very clear about it. If the Western European nations and the US had not put their weight behind trying to promote liberal democratic societies,
Mm-hmm.
and you and I know, as folks like Chomsky keep reminding us, they didn't do a great job of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was riddled with hypocrisy. The US has a lot to answer for in terms of interfering with democracies in every other part of the world. Having said that, the work that we do is so linked with liberal values that are counterintuitive to most other parts of the world. So, for instance, it's not just about human rights, but the idea of equality. Most hierarchical traditional societies do not see the kind of Western progressive equality as a necessarily good thing. The idea of non-hierarchical societies, the idea of non-adversarial engagement, all of this is based on what I call liberal values writ large.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going, and in the next 5 to 15 years, we will find that it's gone, except for maybe a couple of token liberal countries, maybe in Scandinavia or somewhere else, because everything is changing geopolitically, economically, culturally, and environmentally. So for me, this work that I love so much is almost going to become an indulgence, a curiosity, a cute or sweet little process that has very little to do with the ways in which most people in the world make decisions or resolve conflicts. And so, I'm just going to stop there. But this, as you know, is a theme that I've been working on for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I'm so pleased to hear you articulate it so clearly, Ashok. And I actually wanted to catch that argument or that thought from a different angle, if you don't mind. And that is,
Please.
Let me be super frank with you for a second. You are a person of transformation. You have not always done the same work. You have been what I would call, and I'm going to borrow Joseph Campbell here, through the hero's journey. What do I mean by that? I mean that you have were called to do something many years ago in terms of your dispute resolution work. that evolved into work on diversity, onto critical thinking. I see an evolution, if you will. Maybe a reluctant one, or maybe one that was, where you seized it. I'm not sure. But I wanted to actually share a quote with you that made me think about you. Okay. And I would love you to react. I'm going to actually put it in the chat if you don't mind. Okay.
Please.
But the idea in my head is that you have had the courage to answer a call. That's a thesis of mine, a call to bring forward conversations that were uneasy, that were difficult, that made people uncomfortable, including the thoughts you just shared, by the way, right? So around the dispute resolution field. And I just wanted to share this with you real quick. This is from Orwell. Autobiography is only to be trusted when it reveals something disgraceful. A person who gives a good account of themselves is probably lying, since any life viewed from the inside is simply a series of defeats. Right? Can I just say I feel this way? I'm not saying it's just you, right? Like the account of ourselves is far different than the account from outside. And I'm curious if you could say something about how you have seen your own evolution and where that leads to today. Because, I took your course, Demo Sapiens. I want to talk about that connection, but there's a path to this thing. There's a path to essentially creating greater, what I would call human well-being, sophisticated citizenry, to awareness of the nature of what's happening in our world today, which some of us would rather be oblivious to, right? And I think you have your teaching is an end story, or at least the moment we're in now, that is very different from where you began. Can you talk about your experiences for a moment, and then also the perceived disgraces, if you don't mind?
To begin with, I think you give me far too much credit. When I look at what I have done, I never thought of it as courage. The word that comes to mind is actually terror. I have experienced enormous sense of first misgivings, then confusion, and finally unholy terror when I see what's happening in the world. And I don't think, left to myself, I would rather not have switched my career 5 times.
Really?
Really, because in each of those cases, I enjoyed what I was doing.
Right.
But at one point, I felt it was not useful to the world.
Right.
And I think if you dig into that, it's ego. I mean, just the fact that, it's almost megalomaniacal that someone like me should think that he should have an outsized impact on the world. I mean, I could have a career like most people, and that is something of so much dignity. So I sometimes think I am extraordinarily egotistical to even presume that I should be operating at a larger level. Now, but so it's balancing this sense of, am I really doing what makes sense with where the hell is the world at? And can I sleep at night knowing that the work I do is not going to deliver to the world even a tenth of what I promise? You see, one of the things, Merrick, that I became very conscious of, starting with my work in diversity and cross-cultural relations, and then mediation, is that I was making a significant amount of difference to the people who I worked with. But the moment I stepped away from my table or my room and I looked at what was happening in the world around me, it's like, oh my God, what is the point of tending to a beautiful organic garden when the tsunami is going to come and wash my entire village away?
Right.
So you have mentioned a couple of times in passing with me that perhaps, Ashok, you have been, and I'm going to badly misquote you here, but that
but you'll improve on it. Go ahead.
I might. You have suggested that I have an extraordinary amount of anxiety, which kind of almost cues me in to things that perhaps others are not as conscious of. And I think there is something in that. I am just right now terrified. And I'm terrified because when I look at the most extraordinarily safe and opportunity-filled life I have had. I'm 62, and I have had the opportunity of living in free societies. But starting with India, and in the US. And I've experienced what it is to live in parts of the Arab world, which are basically dictatorships and religious dictatorships. And I really have enjoyed and appreciated the freedoms that I've had. And I am devastated at the realization that my own nephews and nieces, my children of my closest friends, are unlikely to live in that kind of a world.
Right.
And for me, there is nothing more devastating than recognizing that the future is not going to be a hippie utopia or an AI utopia, and that everyone from the Silicon Valley titans to even politicians, well-meaning ones, have led us down a garden path. And that's what's scary. And that is the only reason why I have changed my course. And I'm desperately trying to look for something.
Well, let me just jump in on this, right? Because I just want to say, I think when I equate the hero's journey to what I observe in this evolution of your thinking and your thought, it's not because I think you're saving anybody. It's because I think that you are paying attention to your calling. So, I put this quote in here: the world is full of people who stop listening to themselves, right? For whatever reason, you, and something I deeply appreciate is that you are listening to yourself. Sometimes you don't want to. It's called the reluctant hero, right? It's like you'd rather have the job you had before, right? I mean, classic, it's what happens in this journey, at least as I understand it, and I would apply this to myself immediately, and I can say a word about that later, is you know what you have to do, but the first time you hear it, you don't do it, right? It's the first thing. The arc is to be comfortable, and then to be getting uncomfortable because of what you see happening around you, and then be unwilling to listen to the call because you know it's hard and it sucks, pardon the French, right? And then finally you're like, God damn it, what else can I do? It's like, it's the Luke Skywalker moment, right? So I just want to flag, I observe that in your work in MetaCulture Studio, is that I'm not saying you're crushing it, right? Because you wouldn't say that about yourself. You're struggling. But I think I got to tell you, man, you got the hero's courage to do it. It doesn't mean you have it all figured out, and I know you know that, right? But yet you are flagging it, and frankly, it's cost you, right? I mean, that's what I put this other quote up here. It's something, a feeling or the perception of disgrace, right? So this feeling that when you have left a certain tribe, let me be super clear, you left the dispute resolution tribe, right? Which you had been part of for a long time. And you said, hey, this isn't working for me. And by the way, I don't think it's going to work for you going forward. And people said, what you talking about, right? People reacted and said, what are you doing here, man? You're giving up your religion, Ashok, right? And then that caused rupture. I don't know. I just feel like, you have the courage to walk alone at key moments. And I deeply want to acknowledge that. I think you're less alone than you were, because it has been crazy omniscient. The things that we have talked about relative to the political turmoils of the last few years to what is happening at this deep social and systemic level. And then you have named these things prior, right? And I think there's been a lot of, you've never said "I told you so," but I certainly thought you might say it in some moment, right? Because of your awareness, I think, of these patterns, right? And trying to build that awareness through the coursework and other places. Why are you a teacher now? What's that about? Are you a teacher? What are you?
What am I is a better question.
Yeah, let's ask that for a second.
But before that, I just want to say, Merrick, I really appreciate your flagging that and acknowledging that it has cost me. Trust me, it keeps me awake at night. But having said that, I wouldn't change anything. But thank you for acknowledging that.
Absolutely.
So what am I and why am I a teacher? Well, because for the past 30 years, it's been so important for me to be a facilitator. And I'm kind of weaned on the principles and the dispositions of really engaging in those equitable conversations. But you see, here's an insight I got. I got this when I was working with the Muslims and Hindus and Christians in India before the right-wing government came in 2014. I was trying to organize really complex dialogues in order to try and mitigate many of the tensions in these communities in India. And I realized very soon that it's one thing to give people a voice. It's a completely different thing to equip people to discover an intelligent voice. Because the people who wanted a voice and the people who were encouraged to have a voice didn't always know what they were talking about.
Right.
And that is the point at which I realized I can't only be a facilitator. I also have to be a teacher. Because if I really want someone to dig deep and come up with their authentic voice, they need to expand their understanding. They need to increase their knowledge levels. They need to plug the gaps in their own knowledge about the world and the topic at hand.
Right.
What started with that in 2013, by the time I was a couple of years into the US, 2018, I realized it was almost farcical to be a dialogue facilitator when most people had no clue about ground realities. People thought they knew what democracy was. I'll give you an example. I would sit with a group of diversity and cross-cultural and human rights people, and I would ask them, do you know the difference between diversity, pluralism, multiculturalism? And it turned out most people didn't. They conflated it. I ask, mature professionals in these areas, how do you distinguish between equality, freedom, justice, and democracy? And they think, well, they all should be kind of similar. And I think this is devastating because how do we even respond to threats to freedom or justice or democracy if we don't understand these ideas at a deeper level? Everybody thinks they know all these things, and that there is nothing more dangerous than that. I'll just end with a quick thought. When we don't know what we know, and when we don't know what we don't know, we become extraordinarily dangerous to everything, including reality itself as we envision it.
Right. And at that point, actually, it's just whoever's the most eloquent and persuasive, right? Whoever sounds, in the moment, the most compelling rules the day versus a deeper understanding of what's in play and what the trade-offs and the hard decisions, right, and the hard sacrifices of what we call democracy or what we call freedom, with deep misunderstandings about the cost of those things, right, about what they really mean. And frankly, they're deep imperfections, right, that I think your course speaks a lot about. I have a couple of the queries for you, but I didn't know if you want to go that way.
Can I ask you a question before you ask me anymore?
Come on, bring it.
Okay. Is there anything that's happening outside the US that troubles you? Outside the US? And this is a question I love asking Americans, because America is so, it just takes so much out of one that many Americans are not as conscious of what happens elsewhere. So what is the one thing that's happening outside the US that you are troubled, as well as, you know, that takes up your energy or time?
Right. First of all, haven't been out the U.S. forever, but yes, certainly we can hear about it and read about it. Let me say a word about, what troubles me, outside of our sphere, and we definitely in the U.S., even with the international exposure that I get in my work, still live with blinders on, right? Because of the self-ascribed importance of our model, so to speak, right? The U.S. model of governance and so on. So let me say a word about that. Then I want to flag a couple of themes I've been picking up so far, just for people that might be tuning in. What troubles me is that is a very interesting parallel between the weaknesses of democracy in the United States and how those weaknesses are on even fuller display in places that have democracies as a farce, or democracies that actually are inappropriate even to the culture, right? But the most horrifying thing, and this would be specifically true for Latin America, and I'll bring in here the pandemic as a way of articulating this, is how essentially, essentially there are democracies, Colombia and Peru and so on, that are essentially democracies that are fundamentally ruled by the elite, right? What happened in the pandemic? What's happened with the COVID vaccines and so on? The millionaires and billionaires have flown out of the country to get vaccines in Florida, or simply have bent the rules, right, to their own favor. And that is, by the way, not unique to those countries. It is here. It is here. And I think while things have gotten even worse in some of these places where the lack of of a clear framework of rule of law, where essentially the broad gap between what's written on paper, constitutional rights, and what actually people enjoy in their daily livelihoods is a massive delta or gap. That gap actually is here. And it is growing here. And the thing that scares me is seeing the shadow effect of things happening right here in the United States that are eerily similar to where we've seen broken democracies or worse in other parts of the world, and that we are not far off. I think that's the deep misunderstanding of many, I wouldn't say all, but a great deal, is just how thin we are. Just how thin we are on the institutions, how close we are to an aspect of democratic collapse. And frankly, all you got to do is look at institutions that we have now, right, and to know the facts. Only if you are willing to put down your myth, right? I think that's what part of what your teaching has done, is helped to put on a pair of glasses. And it's kind of a rude review, if you will, right? When you get into these conversations, which, by the way, I think are best done through conversation, not through lecture. And I think that's what you're trying to do in many of your courses, is to put the query forward, the Socratic method. Tell me how you think. I'm not going to tell you. Tell me how you think. Now, how do you answer this? Pluralism, diversity, democracy, what does it mean to you? And when people come up short, they realize the gap. And then they take those same pair of glasses and they put them into other country contexts, international, as you just flagged, and then we're like, OMG, things are in a tough way. Things are in a tough way. So I just wanted to flag that, a couple things here that I think this conversation, just to say 2 or 3 things on where we've gone so far for anybody joining us. I mean, this started with like, who are we, right? Facilitator, mediator, teacher, consultant, husband, we didn't cover that, father, and so on. All those identities, and then the evolution of those identities. And I asked you about the hero's journey, which you are demure on, but I will put that hat on you occasionally, only because I think you're doing something that is hard. You may not call it courageous, but I will certainly call it hard. And then ultimately, I think it leads to a question about what now. That's where we are now. What is calling our attention here and externally, and why is that important? And what is our calling to this? Not that we're particularly special, let me be clear, because I don't think we think of ourselves as that, but we all have a duty, I would suggest. I'm actually just thought of a few things to share with you. I have one quote, and then I want to connect this into something else. I'm sorry to barrage you, but I love this guy. Tagore. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and I saw that life was duty. I acted, and behold, duty was joy.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I just want to say that I feel like this is the struggle. The struggle is to understand your duty and marry it to joy. And that is a very hard marriage, say. It can sometimes lead to divorce with yourself, right? I just think that's important, and that's something that I've appreciating this question with a very unclear answer from myself, but vis-a-vis some of these engagements I've had with you. So I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you. And, I won't accuse you of cultural appropriation for quoting Tagore to an Indian. I love it. I love it. And I have to say, this brings up so much for me. And one of the things that I want to just put out there is, you see, I grew up in a very traditional environment. Society was very traditional. And my first 35 years was spent fighting the system. The system, it started with the family. It started with my school. It started with the customs and traditions of society. It started with the materialism that I found in middle class India in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I was so upset with everything that had to do with tradition and convention that I rebelled against the idea of duty. For me, duty was synonymous with obedience, and it was something that was almost slavish.
Right.
Okay, man, I have free will. What do you mean duty? I decide based on my autonomy, my mind, what I will do. Nobody, least of all my family, has the right to impose duty on me. It took me, and I joke about this, it took me to come to the US in 95 to see what happens when the idea of duty is removed from the social environment.
Right.
I saw that while in India, with my family or with society at large, I might have been a bit of an outlier, rebelling against duty. I saw what happens when millions of Ashoks populate a place. And when you have, and I was in Boston, most people had the same individualistic, extremely aggressive approach towards society. And I realized how devastating it is for society. And for the first time in my life, I realized, and I'm still realizing this, that my family, and I mean my extended family and my society in India, tolerated me way beyond I could have actually expected them to. Because that society, being traditional, had enough of a latitude to deal with an outsider, an outlier rather. But when you have too many Ashoks in an environment, the entire society becomes vulnerable.
Right.
So for me now, even though I still struggle with anyone telling me what I should do, I have started respecting the importance of duty. And I can see the extraordinary dignity and beauty and even love that comes out of following through from a sense of duty.
Yes. And when you are able to hear and see and act on that duty, it brings a sense of dignity. And from that dignity comes a sense of joy and possibility. Is this actually, like, I don't want to put you on the spot, but like, I feel like I sense more joy from you recently. Is it true? I mean, is your work joyful or is it something else?
You see, it wasn't joyful. It was creative, but it wasn't joyful until about a year ago. And I hate to put it this way because I have already too much of a reputation for being a downer. But I started feeling joy the moment I completely gave up on trying to change the world. Until a year and a half ago, I was focused on alerting people to mobilize and to find a way to stop this collapse.
Right. Wake up, right? The dam's breaking.
Right. But now it's like, hey, the dam's broken or very close to breaking, and nothing I do or any of my peers do is going to prevent that. Why don't we enjoy understanding about the dam, understanding about the waters, understanding about what it means to live in a broken dam? And so the joy that you might sense, the joy you might sense from me is the joy of focusing only on understanding.
Right.
Not on changing anything.
Can I follow the metaphor for a second? Because I feel like, okay, yeah, the dam's breaking. I can't get you to run. I can't save you. It's not my job. So you are embracing the moment of building awareness about what's happening. But let me follow it. Let me say that, are you saying, hey, no matter what, we're all going to drown? Or are you saying, guess what? There's a chance that we might learn to swim. Even if we get flooded out, it changes everything. Some of us might actually learn to swim through this. Tell me the back end of the narrative. What are you seeing?
So, because I am a fan of history, and particularly the last 10, 15 years, I have immersed myself on the evolution of human societies and civilizations, and particularly the ways in which great nations, great civilizations have risen and collapsed. And one thing that has become very apparent to me is we can't stop the collapse, but the collapse doesn't mean the annihilation of a species or of the planet. There is a way in which life, as well as human societies, will continue. But we would be mistaken to presume that just because they continue, they would be of a nature that would afford us the kind of latitude, the kind of freedoms, the kind of rights that many of us are enjoying today. I see that the world of tomorrow is going to be a world that is more in the image of China or Russia or tomorrow's India, or even in the West, more authoritarian. And that means that there are many people who are going to be left out in a way that we don't even see today. Today, if I'm offensive to, if a white person says something that I think is offensive to me, I can take them to court or mobilize a group on social media to destroy him and his job.
It's
I mean,
incredible.
can you imagine what we are doing to ourselves right
Yeah.
now?
Did you see the story out of Smith College?
Oh, yeah. I've been
Incredible.
following it very,
Wow.
very closely. And the New York Times, for instance, my
Sure.
favorite paper. And it's disgusting to see what we are doing to our own culture
Mhm.
of humaneness, culture of liberal values. But this is, I say, Merrick, you and I, me more than you because I'm older,
Mm.
we have had the good fortune of taking the best from the world
Yes.
and enjoying it. And I don't think that's going to be the way it is. It doesn't mean that everyone is going to be enslaved. It
Right.
doesn't mean there will always be winners. There will be people, maybe computer scientists who have great jobs, or AI or
Mhm.
robotic scientists who have great jobs,
Mhm.
who will rise to the top and will lead good lives for themselves
Yes.
and their families. But
Sure.
I can't see that for a few billion people.
Yeah.
Merrick, can I just say,
Yeah.
you and I have been going at it for a while. I see that many people have been posting comments.
Mm.
Would you
Yeah.
mind if,
Let's
and,
let's
I'll
yes.
take one and then if you can find another one that you want to
Yeah,
take,
sure.
you know?
Let's yes. And I got a few more things to say on the back end, but
Hey,
let's see what's going on here.
sounds good.
Go ahead.
I see Lauren asking, how close to the brink will we get until we figure it out and start to turn the ship around? Will we
Mhm.
recognize the brink before we get there, before it's too
Mhm.
late? Lauren, if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would have said, we need to act fast because we could be getting to the brink very soon.
Mhm.
If you ask me today, as you are, I would say we are at the brink. In fact, I would say, in many uh, in many ways, we have passed the tipping point. This could be true in terms of climate change. It could be true in terms of the unsustainability of the global economic system. It definitely is true in terms of the collapse of social norms and mores,
Mm.
particularly in the West. The West is destroying itself. And I mean, that's a separate conversation in every which way possible. I would say, I would go to the extent of saying that if an enemy of the West, let's just say someone sitting in China, Russia, any other part of the East or the South, had embarked on a 40-year plan to destroy the West, they wouldn't have done anything differently. So, having said that, the question is not how do we step away from the brink? The question is how do we find a way to hold on to what we have that is precious,
Mhm.
even as we tip over the brink?
Yes.
It's not about embracing the brink. We
Yeah.
must never embrace the brink or
Yes.
the abyss, but we have to hold on to what is wonderful
Mhm.
about human society.
Yeah.
Merrick,
Great. Super.
why
Let
don't
me
you
just flag
start?
one other thing that Faika Hanim, I hope I have your name correct. They say, points out an irony Faika does. It's true, going through the process of disintegrating democracy in the US, that in fact, we had actually helped employ many of these conditions, right? Instruments in creating them, right? So yeah, yes, what can I say, right? We're so brilliant, right? These kinds of things like the deployment of what we think is religion, right? On what is the appropriate way of governance for the world, right? And the attention, the even sometimes I should dare say, and I know it's controversial, the exaggeration about the importance of freedom as we understand it, right? And whether and how that fits with cultural and social conditions in other parts of the world, and the assumption that we're told over and over that we are the best. We have a real ego problem in this country, let me tell you. And the more, I mean, yes, I am aware that other places are as or more broken, right? And I'm not discounting that. What I am saying is the assumption that we've got it figured out and that we can deploy is pretty tough to swallow once you've got some exposure to how others in other cultures live as well. Yes.
Absolutely. So I see that Nilam, who was a student for a couple of courses, has a question. Is the idea that America is back after Biden's inauguration, is that hollow? Well, the idea that anything can go back is a ludicrous one for me. We can't go back. It's kind of like I think it was Thomas Wolfe, or was it? Yeah, you can't go home again. I mean, it's just. I say this to people who progressives who are dreaming of a 1960s style civil rights movement. That was unique in history. It was unique because at that point in time, America had the confidence and literally was the most powerful country in the world. And for them, the people in power to give concessions to minorities was almost like a no-brainer. They fought it, they didn't want to give it, but the fact of the matter is, it was easy enough for them to share power. That's not possible anymore. People in power anywhere in the world are tenuously holding on to it, except for China. Okay, it's always except for China right now. But who knows what's going to happen in China in 10 years. And here's another insight I had after doing this work for many years. Equal societies, or societies that want to be equal, and democratic societies are totally dependent on the goodwill of the dominant group. It's not something we want to accept. It's only when the dominant group or the majority is willing to share power with the minorities, with the less dominant, that you have a democracy. This is completely counterintuitive, because most of us think if we fight for democracy, if we fight for minority rights, we will get that kind of a society. No fears, it's not going to happen.
Indeed. Ashok, I think we have about 5 or 6 minutes left, and I wanted to actually take that thread and actually bring it down into a few quite personal questions at the end, if you don't mind. They're rapid fire. Are you ready? And I will answer them too, if you want to hear my answer.
Go for it.
You're such a curious person. I want to know what's on your nightstand next to the bed. What's there? Really quick. You got 10 seconds. What's there?
Ibuprofen.
Nice. I got a mess and 25 books. Next. An ordinary moment in your life that brings you joy. Super ordinary. What is it?
Cooking for my wife.
That's right. And by the way, you don't follow recipes, which is even better, right? Brilliant. Mine, reading stories. Reading stories to 8-year-olds right now. The last thing you binged and you loved, food or media, like you couldn't get enough of it. What was it?
I confess, Netflix, HBO, and Amazon. I love shows, particularly Brit shows. I am a sucker for Brit mysteries.
Oh my God. Me, I'm a sucker for dark chocolate. And I'm like, essentially, I'm a drug addict. I've become a drug addict through this pandemic. I need it at 9 o'clock. It's essential.
Oh, wow.
All right. 85% cacao. Something people often get wrong about you.
So many things. I think a lot of people today think I am always serious. They should just talk to my wife. I mean, no, I am serious usually only in public, or when I'm talking about something that is wrong with the world. Otherwise, I'm like a stupid adolescent.
I love that, by the way. Gotta have some silly, otherwise we're not gonna make it. Let me flag one more thing. Something you're grateful for right now that's not this conversation and it's not your wife. Which one is it? What is it? Something you're grateful for.
I'm grateful for my mind. I am in love with the capacity of my mind to explore and get frustrated and come back when it's being beaten down. There is nothing else that I value as much as my mind.
Wonderful. Last one. What's your gift? If you believe in a hero's journey, you realize that the shift is from the hero's work to the artist's work. What is your gift?
I think I see ideas. I see ideas in a way that very few of the people around me see them.
Mm-hmm.
I think I see them fully fleshed out.
Mm-hmm.
And so every idea that I look at, it's almost like an intimate experience. I'm almost making love to the idea. And when I do that, that idea is real for me in a way that I find is kind of becoming rare in the world. And for me, it's that intimate experience of engaging with, immersing myself in something that
Mm-hmm.
is the only thing that I would consider a gift that I have.
Wonderful. Let me just catch a thread onto that for myself and answer a question that I'm posing to you myself, and then thread it to a last thought. And that is that my sense right now, in the spirit of gift, is arriving. Maybe we're never arrived, but arriving at the moment where we can give of our gift without the expectation of outcome. Right? And I think that's what's happening in parts, but I won't speak to it completely because that would be ridiculous. But that's in part what's happening with MetaCulture Studio, is creating the space without the expectation, which is the nature of this exchange, of the learning that we've been doing, and what you are offering to cast light on the circumstances that we face, right? And maybe someone will swim behind the dam, maybe they won't. We don't really know. Yeah, it ain't gonna be pretty. We know that, right? And I think you're sort of putting some light on that, and that is helpful. I know it's not your job, but I'm super grateful for it. And I wanted to say one last thing. I'm killing you with the quotes today, but this one is what I feel that this is about: to do the useful thing, to say the courageous thing, to contemplate the beautiful thing. That is enough for one person's life. I think you're making a good attempt.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And, I was told by my team that I should use this opportunity to plug my courses. So you'll forgive me for, just reminding folks that we don't have any funding at all. And I'm not asking you for money. But if you join our courses, whether you can pay for it or not, you would be supporting the work that we do. Because really, there is nothing else that MetaCulture, me, or the few people who volunteer can give you, except for these courses, which I believe are really, there's a lot of value in it. We have the next Culture and Democracy course starting on the 11th of March. A really interesting new course called Islam and Pluralism. It's really more about pluralism than Islam, but because I've been working with Muslims for many, many years, I believe them to be a highly at-risk group in non-Muslim countries. I have put together this 12-session course that any of you interested in coexistence, any of you interested in conflict between religious groups or ethnic groups will find very useful. And coming in April and May are two courses very close to my heart. The first one is critical thinking. I think it's going to be, if I can allow myself to say, it'll blow your mind, because it's really about the mind in a way that most people don't see it. And finally, a very different look at relationships. That course is coming in May, and it is to look at relationships from a completely counterintuitive place. It's not just about mediation skills and how to talk to people you don't get along with, or how to have conversations between red and blue. All of those are premised on certain foundational ideas and values. And I want you to get excited about that before you start using all those wonderful tools that you already might have. So again, Merrick, This was awesome. I knew
Loved it.
that inviting you to help me launch this would be brilliant. And
Well,
thank you so much for joining
well,
me.
all I feel is gratitude, man. It's lovely to have the connection, and it feels whole and it feels full of dignity. And happy to join you again in the future. Be well, man. Ciao.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. And if I have these questions in the comment, I promise I will respond to them by email to you personally. So if you want to take a couple of minutes to put down any last questions, I promise to get to it over the next week. I can see that Izzy, my friend Israela, has empathized with or finds ibuprofen funny. I wasn't joking. I mean it sometimes.
Indeed. Don't we all? All right.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Ciao.